War is supposed to clarify history. It leaves dates, names, coordinates. Yet the Second World War, despite being the most documented conflict in human memory, still hides rooms that light has never reached. Beneath its statistics run 10 unanswered questions. Fragments of intelligence operations, missing treasures, vanished people, and strange signals that no document fully explains. What survives is evidence without conclusion. The first mystery begins in the Baltic Sea. In 1945, a German submarine, U-530, surfaced off the coast of Argentina 2 months after Germany's surrender. Its commander, Otto Vermuth, claimed he had fled to avoid capture, yet refused to explain why his ship had no logs, no torpedoes, and appeared freshly scrubbed. The crew surrendered without resistance. Intelligence officers interrogated them for weeks but extracted nothing consistent. Rumors spread that the sub had delivered high-ranking Nazis, or even scientific cargo, to a secret refuge in Patagonia before turning itself in. Decades later, divers found wrecks of other U-boats along the same coast. Whether coincidence or coordination, no manifest has ever surfaced. The file remains open in 3 countries. Another enigma lies in the ruins of Berlin. The disappearance of the Amber Room. Built in the 18th century for the Russian Tsars, the chamber was carved entirely from amber panels backed with gold leaf. German troops dismantled it in 1941 and shipped it to Königsberg, where it vanished during Allied bombing in 1945. Every few years, a new lead emerges. A hidden tunnel. A train sealed in a mountain. Crates discovered in a Polish lake. Each investigation ends in dust and speculation. The last known photograph shows the panels stacked neatly for transport, as if waiting to be found. To this day, the world's most extravagant piece of art may still lie behind a wall that nobody has yet chosen to break. A third puzzle involves sound rather than sight, the ghost messages of 1943. Allied codebreakers monitoring Axis radio traffic intercepted transmissions that carried no cipher pattern. The signals repeated coordinates and weather reports in Morse that matched no front, using call signs belonging to non-existent units. After the war, declassified British files listed them as phantom stations, purpose undetermined. Some historians believe they were deception operations designed to saturate the airwaves and confuse direction finders. Others note that several messages referenced locations later used in Cold War intelligence routes. The frequencies still occasionally activate during solar storms, as if equipment left running somewhere continues to transmit out of habit. The fourth unsolved story is personal. The fate of Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews by issuing protective passports in 1944. In January 1945, he was taken by Soviet authorities for questioning. Moscow later announced he had died in prison 2 years later of a heart attack, but documents released after the USSR's collapse contain references to prisoner number 7, questioned as late as 1955, whose description matches Wallenberg. Russian archives admit inconsistencies, but nothing more. If he lived, where was he kept, and why? For a man who rescued others from disappearance, his own vanishing remains history's bitter symmetry. Not all mysteries concern people. Some concern machines. The German Bell, Die Glocke, appears in late-war intelligence briefings collected by Polish resistance. It was described as a device shaped like a bell, surrounded by rotating cylinders, producing radiation and an intense humming noise. Witnesses spoke of livestock dying near its test site. Skeptics call it myth, confusion between radar experiments and desperate rumor. Yet the scientists named in those reports later disappeared into classified Soviet programs, and U.S. intelligence quietly copied the files into Project Paperclip dossiers. No physical trace has ever been verified, but too many bureaucracies acted as if something existed. Whether weapon, reactor, or metaphor for Nazi obsession with miracle technology, the bell symbolizes a question that refuses to decay. Then there is Flight 19 of the U.S. Navy, the training squadron that vanished over the Atlantic in December 1945, months after the war's end but within its lingering orbit. 5 torpedo bombers left Florida on a routine navigation exercise. Their compasses failed simultaneously. Radio contact degraded into confusion, then silence. A rescue plane launched after them also disappeared. Wreckage was never recovered. The Navy's official report blamed pilot disorientation, yet transcripts show multiple compasses failing in different aircraft. The mystery fed decades of Bermuda Triangle mythology, but the technical question remains unsolved. How did identical instruments malfunction at the same moment in clear weather? Sometimes the smallest anomalies survive longest. Behind these stories runs a larger pattern: the fog of intelligence. World War II generated oceans of secrecy, coded operations, double agents, psychological warfare. Many mysteries exist not because of what happened, but because of what was hidden deliberately and then forgotten. In the chaos of victory and collapse, archives were burned, ships scuttled, witnesses silenced. Every government destroyed part of its own memory to protect its future. The result is a conflict that never quite ends. Even now, historians reconstruct events from fragments like archaeologists of paper. Pain drives that pursuit. The war scarred continents, and pain, unlike triumph, insists on understanding. We remember the unresolved precisely because they wound our sense of order. Each unanswered question stands as proof that knowledge, like peace, is never complete. The deeper historians dig into the Second World War, the more they discover how much of it was never meant to be found. Behind every well-documented battle lies an operation erased before it was even named. Wars end. Secrecy doesn't. Files were burned, witnesses died, and truth was split into classified fragments scattered across continents. What we call mystery is often simply history doing its job too well, protecting itself from exposure. And within those shadows, the second set of enigmas waits. The seventh mystery, because the count continues whether or not the war does, is the disappearance of General Hans Kammler, the SS engineer who oversaw Nazi Germany's secret weapons programs. He controlled the construction of V-2 rockets, underground research facilities, and the transfer of technology during the Reich's final collapse. In April 1945, as Soviet troops closed in, Kammler vanished. Some documents claim he committed suicide near Prague. Others insist he escaped aboard a plane heading toward Austria. In the post-war years, fragments of testimony from American officers hinted that Kammler had been captured and interrogated under Operation Paperclip, his death staged to erase the paper trail. But no declassified record bears his name. The US and Soviet space programs both advanced using German rocket engineers who once worked under him, yet his own fate dissolved into footnotes. If he lived, his silence became part of the technology he helped invent. Precision designed to leave no trace. Mystery 8 concerns something less personal but more unnerving: the so-called Nazi Gold Train of 1945. According to wartime Polish rail manifests, a heavily guarded train left Breslau carrying dozens of wagons loaded with art, jewels, and bullion looted from across Europe. It never reached its destination. Soviet and Polish investigators later found empty tunnels blasted shut near Wałbrzych, but no cargo. Over the decades, treasure hunters scanned the mountains with radar and drones, claiming to detect anomalies in the bedrock, hollow spaces, metallic signatures, but excavations revealed nothing but air and legend. The logical explanation is mundane. The train was dismantled, its cargo redistributed among fleeing officials, its paperwork deliberately destroyed. Yet the myth persists because absence provokes imagination more efficiently than proof. The image of an armored ghost train frozen inside a mountain says more about how humans process loss than about missing gold. The next puzzle lies at sea: the sinking of the HMS Hood and the strange survival of its data. When Britain's largest battlecruiser exploded during its duel with the German battleship Bismarck in May 1941, only 3 of its 1,318 crew survived. The blast was so intense it split the ship in 2. For decades, naval engineers argued over what caused the detonation. Initial theories blamed an armor flaw. Later evidence pointed to unstable cordite propellant. But when the wreck was found in 2001, high-resolution footage revealed the magazine doors intact, meaning the explosion began outside the storage compartments. Some researchers now suspect a chain reaction triggered by an armor-piercing shell that ignited fuel vapor trapped under the deck, a one-in-a-million convergence of chemistry and geometry. Yet, because the fragments are scattered across the seabed, confirmation may never come. Sometimes mystery survives not from conspiracy but from physics, evidence too deep to reach. Mystery 10, or perhaps the one that loops back to the beginning, is the lost bomber over Tokyo. In March 1945, during the firebombing campaign, a single B-29 nicknamed Thunderbird vanished from radar between Saipan and Japan. No distress call, no debris. Years later, Japanese fishermen reported recovering a wing fragment bearing U.S. serial numbers, but records showed that part had already been written off earlier in the war. American archives list Thunderbird as missing, presumed lost at sea. Yet a declassified Japanese Navy document mentions a captured heavy aircraft, found largely intact on a remote island and dismantled for study. No photographs, no coordinates, no follow-up. The truth likely sank beneath bureaucratic overlap, but the absence persists like static between nations that no longer talk about it. Even more elusive is Operation Long Jump, the alleged Nazi plot to assassinate Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin during the Tehran Conference in 1943. Soviet intelligence announced it had foiled the plan before it began, crediting agents who intercepted German commandos en route. Western historians long dismissed the story as Soviet propaganda, but declassified OSS reports confirmed that Axis networks in Iran were unusually active that winter, their radio traffic abruptly ending the week of the conference. Whether an assassination was actually attempted or merely prepared remains uncertain. The absence of bodies is not proof of absence. Successful prevention leaves no wreckage. Intelligence victories are designed to look like nothing happened. Perhaps that's why this mystery endures. It's the echo of a disaster that may never have occurred. Equally strange are the files surrounding Japan's Unit 731, the biological warfare division stationed in occupied Manchuria. Here, logic collides with morality. The unit conducted lethal experiments on prisoners, testing frostbite, plague, and chemical agents under controlled conditions. When Japan surrendered, American occupation forces granted immunity to its scientists in exchange for their research data. Most records were destroyed, but fragments surfaced in declassified archives. Notes on vaccine resistance, diagrams of aerosol dispersal systems, and references to human trials with favorable results. To this day, the full contents of those reports remain sealed, officially to protect national security, unofficially to protect conscience. The mystery isn't what happened. It's why we still prefer not to look at it too closely. Some truths remain unsolved because we choose not to solve them. Beyond laboratories and battlefields lies another question that outlasted surrender: the missing millions of war refugees who were never recorded. As borders shifted and nations redrew themselves, entire populations disappeared on paper. Census comparisons show at least 3 million untraceable individuals across Eastern Europe by 1950. Some died anonymously in camps, others were absorbed into new regimes under false identities. The logic of bureaucracy swallowed them. In archives, they exist as statistical ghosts, negative space where human lives once stood. Their absence is not mystery in the cinematic sense. It is mystery as mathematics, a subtraction nobody wants to calculate. A smaller but equally haunting riddle is the fate of Subhas Chandra Bose, the Indian nationalist leader who sought Axis support for India's independence. Japanese reports claim he died in a plane crash near Taipei in August 1945. Yet British and Indian intelligence files describe sightings of Bose months later in Soviet territory. No remains were conclusively identified. Independent commissions have reopened the case repeatedly, each time colliding with political utility. For some, his martyrdom serves the nation. For others, his survival threatens established narratives. In history, truth is rarely neutral. It always serves someone. Then there are the phantom cities of wartime intelligence, names that appear in decrypted messages but correspond to no known location. During 1944, Allied intercept units logged transmissions from a site codenamed Schwarzwaldwerk, described as producing advanced flight components. No such facility was ever found. Satellite analysis decades later located unusual tunnel systems under the Black Forest, later repurposed as Cold War bunkers. Were those the same coordinates? Or were the transmissions camouflaged for something else? The logical conclusion is misdirection. Counterintelligence inventing targets to drain Allied resources. But each falsehood leaves residue. Even a lie can outlive its author when it's carved into codebooks and bureaucracies. Every mystery from the war shares one property: incompleteness. Evidence exists, but the contexts that gave it meaning are gone. Paper decays, memory distorts, and what remains acquires a life of its own. The human brain, hungry for closure, builds stories to bridge the gaps. That's how myth enters history, not as fiction, but as connective tissue-binding isolated facts. A submarine becomes an ark for fugitives. A vanished train becomes greed's monument. An empty tunnel becomes a vault for lost art. In each story, what we're really searching for is moral order, the assurance that secrets, once revealed, will explain everything. But war rarely grants that. It ends too suddenly, leaving questions unfiled. Historians sometimes describe archives as cathedrals of paper. Each file is a votive candle lit to preserve memory, but the corridors are full of extinguished flames. What remains are fragments, coordinates without maps, testimonies without witnesses, numbers without context. To approach them logically is to accept frustration as method. Proof is the rarest casualty of war. Today, satellites photograph every square meter of the planet, yet the Second World War still hides beneath modern geography. New wrecks appear under polar ice. Encrypted diaries surface in estate sales. A rusted box found in a forest changes a timeline by an hour. Each discovery clarifies one corner and deepens the darkness around it. Logic itself becomes the last battlefield. Reason fighting myth for custody of memory. And in that struggle lies the 12th, unlisted mystery: why the human mind continues to revisit the war long after all soldiers have turned to dust. Perhaps because the conflict wasn't only global, it was psychological. It proved that civilization and barbarism can operate under the same orders. We return to its puzzles not to glorify them, but to measure our own potential for forgetting. Every unanswered question from the Second World War is a mirror. Look into it, and you see how knowledge works. Partial, persistent, unwilling to rest. The war ended. The investigation didn't. Truth remains mobilized. The remains of silence, truth remains mobilized. It marches quietly now, through archives and memory, through classrooms and documentaries, still carrying a rifle made of curiosity. Wars end when weapons fall silent, but information never lays down its arms. The Second World War may have stopped killing, yet it never stopped questioning. Every document declassified, every wreck recovered, every interview recorded is another skirmish in an unfinished campaign against oblivion. The aftermath of a total war didn't produce peace. It produced investigation. Victory required forgetting. Justice required remembering. Humanity, unable to do both, built institutions to outsource the contradiction. Historians, archivists, intelligence agencies, all chasing fragments of meaning through the rubble. 8 decades later, they are still chasing. The silence that followed 1945 turned out not to be quiet at all, but filled with the low hum of unanswered logic. Consider how certainty disintegrated in Berlin. When Soviet troops entered the city, they expected to capture a corpse and confirm a conclusion. Instead, they found confusion, burnt remains, partial records, overlapping testimonies. The Allies wanted a photograph. Stalin wanted ambiguity. It was more useful politically to keep Hitler half alive, a ghost that justified vigilance. A single body would have ended a myth. The absence of a body turned him into a lesson. In the vacuum of evidence, speculation metastasized into folklore. And that, perhaps, was the first truth of the post-war world, that control over mystery is more powerful than control over fact. Across the continent, other silences were engineered with equal precision. Scientists who had served empires of death reappeared with clean resumes. Project Paperclip in the United States, Operation Osoaviakum in the Soviet Union. Both scavenged the defeated nation's knowledge like surgeons harvesting organs. The names of the scientists survived. Their crimes did not. Laboratories that once produced weapons were repainted and renamed, and the data kept flowing. Humanity had learned to recycle evil efficiently. The mysteries that followed, missing documents, redacted testimonies, vanished experiments, were not accidents. They were policy. Some questions stay unsolved because their answers are too useful to lose. Even nature participated in the cover-up. Wrecks slid beneath oceans faster than divers could find them. Jungles in Burma and Papua New Guinea swallowed aircraft whole. Arctic ice preserved submarines in metallic hibernation. When modern explorers locate them, they discover not revelation, but irony. Perfectly preserved evidence that still refuses to speak. Steel does not tell stories. It only confirms absence. Every discovery simply proves how much remains unseen, and in that unseen space, the human imagination continues to perform its old wartime duty: invention. The public still hunts for the Amber Room, the Nazi gold train, the U-boats off Patagonia. These quests are not greed disguised as archaeology. They are rituals of comprehension. The human mind hates incompletion. It searches for pattern, even when pattern isn't there. In these mysteries, we find a substitute for control. If treasure can be found, then meaning can be restored. If meaning can be restored, then suffering was not entirely waste. But logic whispers another interpretation. The persistence of mystery is what keeps remembrance alive. Total explanation would mean closure, and closure is another word for forgetting. As long as something remains unsolved, the mind stays alert, revisiting the past not as nostalgia, but as inquiry. The unknown keeps the moral temperature of history from cooling into complacency. Still, some enigmas do not fade because someone ensures they don't. Intelligence agencies, for all their technology, still function on selective opacity. Files declassified in one decade are quietly reclassified in another. National security is the bureaucratic term for perpetual uncertainty. Somewhere in the vaults of London, Washington, and Moscow lie folders marked "Never Destroy," yet also "Never Release." The war taught bureaucracy that secrecy was a renewable resource. Mystery became infrastructure. Meanwhile, technology expands the battlefield of knowledge. Satellites map wrecks on the seafloor, AI decodes handwritten letters, quantum scanners peer through glaciers, and each discovery exposes a deeper layer of ambiguity. The more precisely we measure, the more contradictions we uncover. New photographs of old ruins reveal discrepancies in official histories. Translation algorithms render diary pages that contradict memoirs. The war keeps rewriting itself because we keep interrogating it with finer instruments. Precision, paradoxically, multiplies doubt. Why does this matter? Because every unsolved story carries moral weight. The uncertainty surrounding Unit 731's research is not just an academic issue. It determines how we value ethics against progress. The debate over Kamler's disappearance is not gossip. It exposes how nations prioritize utility over justice. Each mystery, stripped of romance, is an X-ray of civilization's conscience. We preserve ambiguity not because we cannot find truth, but because we are still negotiating which truths we can live with. Listen closely to how the past talks. It speaks not in confessions, but in echoes, repeated patterns of omission. The same structure appears again and again. Evidence destroyed to protect morale. Witnesses silenced for stability. Questions postponed until safe to answer. These are not accidents. They are the grammar of organized forgetting. The war industrialized that grammar, and the peace adopted it as habit. Silence, once tactical, became cultural. Every generation returns to the same coordinates, digging in the same metaphorical soil. The bunker, the train tunnel, the cold laboratory. What they find are reflections of themselves. The child of the atomic age looks for moral certainty. The digital generation looks for data. Both find mirrors. Each discovery tells us less about 1945 and more about what the living still fear. The war's mysteries function like psychological checkpoints. Are we ready to face what victory cost? Are we willing to admit what survival required? The answer, often, is no. So the files stay sealed, the wrecks unraised, the story conveniently incomplete. Perhaps that incompleteness is the real inheritance. The 20th century taught that truth can be destroyed as easily as cities, but also rebuilt, brick by curiosity. Each historian, journalist, or diver entering the archives reenacts the moral act of reconstruction. Their tools differ: pens, cameras, sonars, but the motive remains constant: to replace rumor with reason, to extract logic from chaos. The task is endless precisely because it matters. When we say unsolved, what we often mean is uncomfortable. Some puzzles would break the balance of national myths if resolved. Others would demand accountability from the dead. In a sense, the persistence of mystery is the world's quiet compromise, the price we pay for collective survival. History keeps its unsolved cases like old nations keep their ruins, as warnings disguised as monuments. At night, when researchers close the archive doors, the silence resumes. Dust settles on the same files that once dictated movements of armies. The air itself seems to remember urgency. Somewhere beneath that quiet sits a document that could rewrite a timeline, a name that could collapse a lie, a photograph that could make denial impossible. But until someone chooses to look, truth remains potential energy, mobilized but not deployed. So the war continues, not in violence but in verification. Its front lines are academic conferences, its weapons are scanners and syntax. Every generation advances a few inches closer to coherence before retreating again into interpretation. That is how history fights entropy. The archive becomes its battlefield. Memory becomes its armor, and perhaps that is how it should be. Perfect knowledge is sterile. Mystery keeps empathy alive. The questions left unsolved remind us that understanding is not a destination, but a discipline, an act of continuous attention to what resists certainty. The greatest tribute to the dead is not to explain them, but to keep listening for what they can no longer say. The Second World War taught the planet how easily order can disintegrate, how quickly rational systems can turn homicidal, and how fragile the truth becomes under pressure. To chase its remaining mysteries is to participate in the opposite process: reconstruction through reason. The search itself is redemption. Truth remains mobilized. And maybe it must. For as long as it keeps marching, humanity keeps learning to question, to verify, to doubt. The noise of war has faded, but its silence still instructs. The investigation is the inheritance. And somewhere beneath the dust, history continues to whisper its unfinished orders. Keep looking. Keep asking. The war is over, but the work isn't.